Why funerals were like big parties in ancient Ireland. Imagine attending a funeral where instead of tears and silence, you hear laughter, music, dancing, and storytelling that goes on for days. Where mourners feast on elaborate meals, drink flowing ale, and celebrate the deceased with such joy that it feels more like a wedding than a wake. This wasn't unusual behavior. This was how ancient Ireland honored their dead for over 1,000 years. Welcome to the world of ancient Irish funerals, where death wasn't the end of a story, but the beginning of the greatest celebration of a person's life. To understand why Irish funerals were like massive parties, we need to dive into the ancient Celtic worldview. The Celts didn't see death as a final goodbye. Instead, they believed in the Otherworld, a mystical realm where souls continued their journey. Death was simply a transition, like moving from one house to another. This belief shaped everything about how they approached death. If your loved one was simply moving to a better place, why mourn in sorrow when you could celebrate their new beginning? The ancient Irish belief that loud wailing and excessive grief might actually hold the soul back from its peaceful journey to the otherworld. The centerpiece of ancient Irish funeral traditions was the wake, but not the quiet, somber affair you might imagine. The Irish wake was a multi-day celebration that could last anywhere from 1 to 7 days, depending on the importance of the deceased. The word wake itself comes from the practice of keeping watch over the body, but the Irish transformed this vigil into something extraordinary. Family and friends would gather in the deceased's home, which would be open to the entire community. The body would be laid out in the main room, dressed in their finest clothes, often with a pipe in their mouth or a drink in their hand. But here's where it gets interesting. The real party happened around the deceased. People would tell stories about the person's life, share funny memories, and even direct jokes toward the body as if they were still alive and participating in the conversation. No Irish wake was complete without an abundance of food and drink. Families would prepare massive feasts, often spending beyond their means to ensure everyone was well fed. Tables would groan under the weight of bread, meat, potatoes, and whatever delicacies the family could afford. But the real star of the show was the drink. Whiskey, ale, and poitin, a powerful Irish moonshine, flowed freely. The belief was that drinking together honored the deceased and brought the community closer. There's an old Irish saying, "It's better to be at a wake than at a wedding," because the hospitality was always more generous, and the crack that's Irish for fun and good times was always better. The drinking wasn't just for celebration, though. The Irish believed that alcohol helped people speak more freely about the deceased, sharing stories and memories they might otherwise keep to themselves. These stories became part of the person's legacy, ensuring they would never be truly forgotten. What really set Irish wakes apart were the entertainment and activities. Professional musicians, called keeners, would be hired not just to play mournful dirges, but lively jigs and reels that got people dancing. Yes, dancing right there in the same room with the deceased. The Irish had traditional wake games that might seem bizarre to modern sensibilities. There were card games, dice games, and even party games like forfeits, where people would have to perform silly tasks if they lost. One popular game called Building the Ship involved elaborate storytelling where each person added to an increasingly ridiculous tale. These weren't considered disrespectful, quite the opposite. The Irish believed that laughter and joy honored the deceased far better than tears and silence. They had a saying, "Laughter at a wake keeps the devil away." Perhaps the most unique aspect of Irish wakes was the practice of keening, a form of vocal lament performed by women called Bean Shawin, or keening women. But even this wasn't purely mournful. Keening was part crying, part singing, part storytelling. and part theatrical performance. Professional keeners would be hired to lead the mourning, and they were true artists. They would wail and cry with incredible emotion, but they would also improvise poems about the deceased's life, recounting their achievements, their family lineage, and their character. Sometimes these keening sessions would become competitive, with different women trying to outcry each other in increasingly elaborate displays of grief and praise. Between the keening sessions, the atmosphere would completely shift back to celebration, creating an emotional roller coaster that helped people process their grief in a healthy, communal way. These elaborate funeral celebrations served important social functions beyond just honoring the dead. In ancient Ireland, community bonds were everything, and wakes were one of the strongest ways to reinforce these connections. Everyone was welcome at a wake, rich or poor, friend or stranger. This radical hospitality meant that people from all walks of life would come together, sharing food, stories, and experiences. Old grudges were often forgotten in the presence of death, and new friendships were formed. The wake also served as a form of social security. By hosting an elaborate wake, families demonstrated their commitment to community values, knowing that when their time came, the community would return the favor. One of the most beautiful aspects of Irish wakes was the storytelling tradition. As people gathered around the deceased, they would share stories not just about the dead person, but ancient myths, legends, and folktales that connected the immediate loss to the broader tapestry of Irish culture. These stories served multiple purposes. They entertained the crowd during the long vigil, they preserved oral traditions, and they placed the deceased's life within the context of Irish mythology and history. In this way, every person who died became part of Ireland's great ongoing story. This tradition of celebratory wakes continued for centuries, surviving even the arrival of Christianity in Ireland. Early Christian missionaries, rather than trying to eliminate these practices entirely, incorporated them into Christian funeral rites, creating a unique blend of pagan celebration and Christian ceremony. However, by the 19th century, these elaborate wake traditions began to decline. The Catholic Church started discouraging the more exuberant aspects, particularly the drinking, dancing, and games. The Great Famine of the 1840s also changed Irish society dramatically, and many traditional practices were lost as people emigrated or died. Today, while Irish funerals have become more subdued, echoes of these ancient traditions still survive. The Irish are still known for their storytelling at funerals, their generous hospitality, and their ability to find humor even in grief. The phrase, celebrating a life, rather than mourning a death, has its roots in these ancient Irish practices. The ancient Irish understood something profound about human nature, that celebration and community support help us process grief better than isolation and silence. Their funeral parties weren't about ignoring death or avoiding sadness, but about affirming life, strengthening community bonds, and ensuring that no one grieved alone. In a world where death has become increasingly clinical and private, perhaps there's wisdom in remembering how the ancient Irish turned their final goodbyes into their greatest celebrations of life.